So, some implementation, the food choices. Again, this is really similar to paleo. It just depends on where you put the emphasis. Meat, fowl, fish, seafood, eggs, animal fats and oils, vegetables of any kinds are a go. Depending on the carbohydrate intake that you want, roots, tubers, and bulbs. And then I have a list here because a lot of people are like, what fits in this category? What the heck are these things? There's plenty of interesting stuff there. I will tell you, limit nut, seed, and fruit intake. I am very wary of consuming any seeds, especially given all the literature that I've read. There's always something bad there. There's something undesirable. Either that there's really high in omega-6 or they have some anti-nutrients in them or whatnot. So I limit nut and seed intake. I actually don't eat any myself. I also limit fruit intake. I eat that only on the weekends, and it's typically a serving of berries or whatnot. Now, if you're really, really active, a little higher on the fruit intake. As far as nuts are concerned, macadamia nuts and cashews are a little better. Almonds aren't that bad. And then berries tend to be favorable choices for fruits. Avoid. Here's the stuff to avoid. All cereal grains, which means all varieties of wheat, whether it's spelt, einkorn, emmer, durum. There's some people that say, the original varieties of wheat are a little better. Maybe. I still recommend you avoiding them. Barley, rye, oats, triticale, corn, rice, sorghum, millet, fonio, and teff. Grain-like substances and pseudo-cereals to avoid, things like amaranth, bread nut, buckwheat, cattail, chia, cockscomb, quinoa, which is a derivative of quinoa, pit seed, goosefoot, quinoa, wattle seed, and pseudo-cereals. This is something I mentioned, are the seeds of broadleaf plants. Dairy is a gray area. Give it a shot. If you're fine and you work well on dairy, try it. If not, take it out. There's research that just came out that showed that it was really good post-workout for fat loss, but there's two problems with the research. One, they only compared it to a sugary drink. Two, it was supported by the dairy industry. So, it's like, gee, I really wish you would have compared that to real food so I can get a better answer.
Just going back to the berries, with recommendations, I tend to put them in the smoothie and grind them all up. Does that do anything to them at all? Does it jeopardize the value?
Not a whole lot. So the question is, if I actually kind of liquefy the meal or make a smoothie out of the berries, am I changing a whole lot? There might be a slight change in the fiber content. What you are doing, however, is that you're increasing the surface area, so nutrients will be absorbed much more quickly from that. And because it's liquid, the gastric emptying is going to be fairly fast. So you're going to get a higher insulin spike from that than you would if you actually ate the berries. So that's one thing that would change. So where were we at? Okay. So something to look out for. Cooking. I mentioned a little bit earlier, a diet based on high heat-treated foods promotes risk factors for diabetes, mellitus, and cardiovascular disease. Cooking does a couple of things. One, we talked about advanced glycation end products. When you cook and you brown really badly, you're creating advanced glycation end products on the meat itself. Eating that has been shown to cause some arterial dysfunction as well as other problems. So you probably, the one thing that I've done is get a crock pot, use it. It's really convenient. You just put a bunch of stuff in the morning, you get home at night, it's cooked, low heat for a long period of time. Tends to be ideal as far as cooking meat is concerned. It's also going to do a lot less damage to some of the polyunsaturated fatty acids, et cetera, et cetera. If you are going to grill, you might want to marinate or add a lot of antioxidant-rich spices because it's going to limit the amount of, during cooking results in reduced meat, plasma, and urine malonaldehyde concentrations. It's going to reduce the concentration of certain problematic compounds that are created when you're grilling the meat at high temperatures. So I think, what was the spice? Rosemary was one of the ideal herbs to use here as an antioxidant. So adding that stuff, even if you're doing low temperature cooking, there's a lot of really good stuff in spices and herbs and spices that you can add. Meal frequency has been shown to be completely irrelevant. We will talk a little bit about intermittent fasting at the end, but whether you're having 6 to 8 meals a day or 3 meals a day, there's not a huge difference. Run with whatever you want to on that front. Then there's a lot of people like, oh man, I just can't do this because I really like to bake. Now, I don't encourage that you do a lot of this because it can promote some bad habits. I did buy this book called Cooking with Coconut Flour, and it kind of teaches you how to make just about anything that you can make with wheat, but with coconut flour. What I like about it is the coconut flour has more fiber, and then the protein comes from eggs. So they mix in the eggs, so you get like a better protein and fat profile than an actual baked good that's made with wheat. Doesn't have any of the anti-nutrients. And I'd say every time this guy says use sugar or use agave syrup, I would actually just order some dextrose. It's referred to as corn sugar. There's no corn left in there. It's just glucose. So use dextrose as your sugar source. And, if the kid's having a birthday, you just make something, go ahead and use that strategy such that you won't look like a total freaks, serving jerky on your kid's birthday. This is a good one. You're probably going to get some clients who are doing everything right. They've got the paleo diet dialed in, they've got the training dialed in, and they're having problems losing fat, specifically at the waist. And then you look at their training, and it's like all Metcon that's like 20-plus minute range. They're really stressed and really busy. They're not sleeping enough. Guess what? This influences the secretion of cortisol, which is a stress hormone, which is going to increase fat accumulation. So chronic stress literally can make you fat. Sleep, get plenty of sleep. I'm looking at 8 to 9 hours a day. Enough, get as much as you can without getting either fired or divorced. Here's another one here. Leptin levels are dependent on sleep duration. So this stuff is really important. It's not just the diet, it's not just the training. And I'd say that there's a lot of people that overdo it on the training. So one of the reasons that I limit the time of my Metcons to like 5 minutes is because this stuff is like a huge, if you go full intensity for a really long time, cortisol is going to be released. And if cortisol gets released and the cortisol levels go too high, it's going to start chewing away at your muscle mass so it can turn the glucogenic amino acids into sugars. You notice that a lot of endurance athletes who don't eat properly and don't train properly, like are really freaking skinny and weak. This is why. And there's and doing that kind of training is a really great way to burn out. So people who are like following, I really like CrossFit, I train with it, but people who are following the CrossFit.com, the website says the workouts are designed to limit or to exceed the capacities of elite athletes. Like, I'm sorry, but like 30-plus minute Metcons should not be part of your regular training. It should not, right? The stuff that's, if I told you, give me 6 weeks and I'm going to get you in the best metabolic shape of your life, would you believe me? Yeah, the Metcon you can build pretty quickly. But if I told you, give me 6 weeks and I'll get you in the strongest you'll ever been, would you believe me? No, strength takes a long time. So you should have like a nice periodized strength training in the background, and you only emphasize longer and longer Metcons if you're, say, getting ready for a competition. But if you have clients that are just coming in, to get the metabolic advantage of this type of conditioning, they're not necessarily looking to compete, and you're beating the dog piss out of them with like 30-minute Metcons every day, you're not doing them a favor. You're really not. They might be like, oh yeah, my coach is good and he pushes me really hard. No, he's not good. So you really need to, put a cap on that stuff. Yeah, it's really great, it's really fun, and I enjoy it, but you can get a really, really fast, blistering workout in 5 minutes. It doesn't have to be 30 minutes. It really doesn't. Not at high intensity. If the work's going to be high intensity, it should be really short in duration. If it's going to be low intensity, then you can make longer duration. You can go take a hike or you can walk all day. It doesn't matter. But you shouldn't be doing Fran all day long. Right? Does that make sense? And that nebulous region of 30 minutes to an hour on a Metcon, that's just really not a good place to stay. Really not a good place to be at. Again, a single night of partial sleep deprivation induces insulin resistance in multiple metabolic pathways in healthy subjects. I just cannot emphasize this enough. This is one night of 4 hours of sleep. It turns out if you do this like a couple nights in a row, you're going to get the insulin sensitivity of a diabetic. So sleep is a huge, huge factor. Not just all about diet. Exercise in the stress system. There's increasing incidence of exercise-related short and long-term consequences, especially concerning the female athlete that many authors describe as the so-called exercise-related female reproductive dysfunction. These consequences include amenorrhea, that's a loss of period, infertility, eating disorders, osteoporosis, coronary heart disease, and euthyroid sick syndrome. So again, this overemphasis on too much exercise is bad for you. There's a lot of long-distance runners female long-distance runners that get really weak, really skinny, lose all their muscle mass, and lose their period. This happens all the time. It's very common. Not a good scene, okay? It's not cool. So, at the end of the day, what do you have? Most of the population has excess carbohydrate consumption, especially fructose, which leads to insulin resistance, and that leads to chronically elevated insulin levels in the bloodstream and inflammation. Omega-6 and omega-3 imbalance leads to inflammation. Irritated or leaky gut leads to inflammation. Chronic stress, too much exercise, lack of sleep leads to chronically elevated cortisol levels and leads to inflammation. Is anybody surprised that we're all screwed up? Everything that we're told to do is a recipe for disaster. And I've shown plenty of scientific evidence to support that position, right? Is anybody surprised that we're all screwed up? It's all there. All the pieces fit together. You're like, oh yeah. If I wanted to screw someone up, I put them on a high carbohydrate, low fat diet with most of the carbohydrate coming from grains and legumes, and I make it do chronic cardio on a treadmill, for hours on end. With really busy schedule at work and with the kids and whatnot, so that they'll lack sleep and they'll be really stressed. And yeah, you're going to get fat, unhappy, weak people. That's what's going to result from that. It's certainly not surprising to me. So we're going to get into the nitty-gritty of post-workout nutrition, and if I'm an athlete, how should I be eating? If I'm just interested in health and longevity, how should I be eating? CrossFit has this contention that your performance, the 3D model of health and performance, actually, the better you perform, the healthier you are. I could not disagree with that more. There are plenty of athletes, mainly endurance athletes, that make huge gains, huge sacrifices in their longevity and their health just for performance. An extreme example of that, a sumo wrestler, right? Here is an athlete that is making a huge sacrifice in their health just to compete. That is definitely, sumo wrestling does not improve your health. And an ultimate, an elite sumo wrestler is not healthy, right? So that's just an extreme example. So here's what's important. When you're doing exercise, maintaining an energy deficit after an exercise has the most potent effect on lipid metabolism, as measured by a higher plasma triacylglycerol concentration and increased plasma fatty acid metabolism by oxidation compared with when nutrient balanced. Carbohydrate deficit after exercise, but not energy deficit, contributed to the insulin sensitizing effects of acute aerobic exercise. So what this thing is saying, it's just listen, if your goal is, if you're interested in weight loss, what you want to do is keep a small caloric deficit after exercise, because that's going to increase fat mobilization. You're going to burn more fat. And if you need to improve your insulin sensitivity, you probably want to leave the carbohydrate out of the diet after, that post-workout carbohydrate meal. You probably want to leave that out of the diet. Now, someone comes to you comes to your gym, has, obvious signs of metabolic derangement, or they're diabetic or whatnot. You probably want to be, to recommend that they at least get something post-workout, but mostly protein and fat. Eating post-workout will lower the levels of cortisol that are released. It'll bring everything back down. But then you want those folks to lose weight, so you make the snack small, and you want those folks to improve their insulin sensitivity, so you want to keep the carbohydrate out. If you've got a fire breather, an elite athlete, the situation is completely different. So we're going to jump into that a little bit. Here's this carbohydrate in the mouth immediately facilitates motor output. And I talked about that a little bit. So, you're at a competition, it's a chipper, it's a long wad, and, you're gassed, and you're forced to take breaks and whatnot. What's a good thing to do when you're forced to take breaks? This is what sports drinks are for. Have some sweet solution, a sports drink, something that has sugar in it, such that your brain's going to say, hey, okay, you can push harder now. So if you're in a situation where you're forced to take breaks, have something sweet. drink it, you're going to be able to push a little harder. This is not something that you want to do all the time, but within a competition setting, you want to gain an edge. This is probably a good idea. Influence of dietary carbohydrate intake on the free testosterone, cortisol show responses to short-term intensive exercise training. So essentially, these guys are taking two groups of endurance athletes. One of them is put on a 60% carbohydrate diet. The other is put on a 30% carbohydrate diet. And what they notice is that the group that's put on a 30% carbohydrate diet gets their what's called free testosterone and cortisol ratio completely screwed up. And it's not because necessarily the cortisol increases, but rather the free testosterone goes down after a while. So the cortisol increases to a certain level, and then the testosterone starts to go down. And that's a bad scene. So what this is telling me, there is a problem with the studies that they didn't give the people enough time to adapt to the 30% carbohydrate diet. So maybe if they had forced the endurance athletes to adapt to it, they would have got a different response. But what this is telling me is that if you're going to do the high carbohydrate demanding exercise, you probably should get that post-workout carbohydrate, right? You really, especially like after really demanding Metcon or something like that, throw the post-workout carbohydrate in, even if you like or prefer to be like ketogenic at some point. Like I said, I did that for a really long time, and then I got to a point where I felt like crap. I just didn't want to do it anymore, and I was really, really low in blood sugar at the end of my workout. So just like throw that in. It's not going to do a whole lot of damage. I'm worried about it because it's been shown that people who are glycogen depleted, when they eat carbohydrate, it goes straight to glycogen repletion. And this is a really interesting thing. This paper is free on the web, and I recommend that you Google the title and that you read it, because a lot of the stuff that we talked about today about carbohydrate metabolism is rehashed in here in a very interesting way. Keep in mind that the results apply to people who are carbohydrate depleted, but what's really interesting is that they say that, hey, it's really well known that the best way to maximize and supercharge the glycogen stores of a human being is to completely deplete their glycogen stores by having them do exercise on a low carbohydrate diet and then put them on a 2-day carbohydrate feeding program of 90% carbohydrate. And then some of you might be like, well, yeah, it's called carbo loading. All the endurance athletes do it. Yeah, all the endurance athletes do it, but they don't do the depletion beforehand. They're constantly on a high carbohydrate diet. So if you're on your way to a competition, a really smart thing to do during your tapering, so that it doesn't affect your training too much, go on a really low ketogenic diet for about 5 days. 2 days prior to the competition, just shove the carbohydrate in, right? Fruit, sweet potatoes, yams, etc. And you're going to step on the starting line with a supercharged glycogen tank. In a serious way, and that's a huge advantage to you, especially if you're doing the Metcon and whatnot. All right, so supplements. Supplements are always a biggie, and like I said, Rob and I are very careful with this stuff. We tend to be very minimalist. If you're on a really strict paleo diet and you get a lot of seafood and sea vegetables, you probably don't need any supplements. You can get away with none whatsoever. You're getting enough omega-3, you're getting enough iodine, there's no problem. If you want to take a few extra, just to be sure that you're getting everything that you need, there's a few things that come recommended. One of them is magnesium. The other is vitamin D3. It turns out that most of us are not getting vitamin D3 because we spend all of our time indoors. So something like I actually take 4,000 to 5,000 IUs a day. I have a paper that recommends 1,000 IUs per 25 pounds of body weight. It gets kind of high, but what's interesting is that even if you supplement a lot, you're not going to suffer from vitamin D toxicity if you go out in the sun, because the sun's going to destroy excess vitamin D3 that's not necessary. That's a really interesting control mechanism. Don't purchase nature-made brand. We've had people that are supplementing with vitamin D3, and they get their vitamin D3 levels checked as if they're not taking any, and they're taking this nature-made brand. Don't take this stuff. Just get some other brand. You do want vitamin D3 and not D2. D2 is made by plants, and it has 4 plants. D3 is for human beings. D2 has less of the activity. and you want it to be in gel caps. You want like a clear translucent capsule that has oil in it, because vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin, and it's not going to get very well absorbed if you're taking it in a capsule or a tablet. So you want it to be a gel cap. Yep.
There's some sources that say that vitamin D can only be activated by sunlight and in the keeping. So like even if you supplement, it's not going to do anything.
That's not true. If you supplement with vitamin D3, it will become the active form. So what is it? I think it's calcidiol goes to the liver, becomes it gets dihydroxylated in the liver, and then it becomes calcitriol in the kidneys. But the D3 is going to be turned into active vitamin D for sure. Yeah, but if you take something that's like upper on the food chain, it might actually not make it to the active form. So, but vitamin D3 definitely should make it to the active form. Kelp, we talked about this already, is a seaweed, a good source of iodine. I think the dose gives you 125 micrograms per day, just to make sure. And then fish oil, no more than 2 to 3 grams per day. That should be sufficient for your needs. Every time I say supplements for vegans and vegetarians, someone says meat. But vitamin B12, there are no sources of vitamin B12 for vegetarians, and there are people think, but John Robbins says that you can get that stuff from soil, so if you don't wash your... John Robbins is not a chemist, and he doesn't realize that what he thinks is vitamin B12 in the soil is not vitamin B12. It has a similar structure, but it's not vitamin B12. And if you're taking vitamin B12, you want it to be methylcobalamin, not cyanocobalamin. Cyanocobalamin has virtually no activity, so it's got to be the methylcobalamin. Taurine, carnosine, L-carnitine. I would recommend an essential amino acid supplement just to round things out a little bit, especially if you want to put on some muscle mass. I would stick to a higher fat diet, like I said, coconut, olive oil, avocados, and whatnot. They can get their DHAs from algae if they want. And they have a problem with killing animals. And then there's this whole thing about multivitamins, and are multivitamins useful? It turns out that they are absolutely and completely useless. I think this is the Cochrane study. So overall, the antioxidant supplements had no significant effect on mortality in random effects meta-analysis, but significantly increased mortality in fixed effect models. So not only are they not preventing deaths, they're actually increasing deaths in certain groups. So they're not very useful. They're not very good. In the trials with a low risk of bias, the antioxidant supplements significantly increase mortality. Not good. Excess vitamin C antagonizes the cytotoxic effects of anti-neoplastic drugs. So these things are so good at protecting cells that they prevent the cancer drugs from killing the cancer cells. So if you take too much vitamin C, you're protecting the cancer from the cancer drugs. That's just great. Again, here, multivitamin use and risk of cancer and cardiovascular disease in women. So multivariate adjusted analyses reveal no association of multivitamin use with risk of cancer, breast cancer, colorectal cancer, all these cancer, mortality, whatever. There's no benefit to taking a multivitamin. Antioxidants prevent health-promoting effects of exercise. When you exercise, like I said, there's reactive oxygen species that are created, and those do a little bit of damage. And it turns out that damage is really important in your body's response. There is a certain amount of inflammation that is necessary for your body to respond properly. So it turns out that if you have too many, if you're overdosing on these antioxidants, your response to exercise is going to be blunted. So consistent with the concept of mitohormesis, exercise-induced oxidative stress ameliorates insulin resistance and causes an adaptive response promoting endogenous antioxidant defense capacity. Supplementation with antioxidants may preclude these health-promoting effects in exercise in humans. So a certain amount of cellular damage when you're doing exercise is necessary to indicate hey, I've actually exercised. This is another. Reactive oxygen species enhance insulin sensitivity, right? So the insulin sensitivity effects of exercise are actually somewhat related to the oxidative damage that occurs during exercise. This is interesting. Chronic niacin overload may be involved in the increased prevalence of obesity in children. So these people find a link between I think what is glucose metabolism and chronic niacin overload, so too much vitamin D, vitamin B, sorry. I think niacin is vitamin B3. If you want more information on vitamin D, I really recommend Grassroots Health. This is a graph that they have on their website, and you see that if you're supplementing at the 4,000 to 6,000 IUs a day, you're more or less in the sweet spot of 50 to 60 nanograms per milliliters, which is essentially where you want to be for vitamin D. There's a lot of really useful information on this site. And then as far as vitamin D is concerned, plenty of health benefits: adiposity, cardiometabolic risk, and vitamin D status. Levels of vitamin D in cardiometabolic disorders, systemic review and meta-analysis. Vitamin D supplementation reduces insulin resistance in South Asian women living in New Zealand who are insulin resistant. Vitamin D status and its relation to muscle mass and muscle fat. More vitamin D equals more muscle mass and more muscle fat loss. And then it's also really important in the immune system. So vitamin D is really, really important. It turns out that high fructose, this is the magnesium now, interferes with magnesium absorption, and that magnesium is really important. What is this? Dietary fructose. Oh yeah, this is a fructose again. And you'll find that magnesium improves, I think it's glucose tolerance and insulin sensitivity. That's right. Magnesium deficiency produces insulin resistance and increased thromboxane synthesis. I'm just going through this stuff really quickly because it's extra stuff that I gave to you if you want to read about it, and that kind of supports this notion that these supplements are probably a good thing to take. So that gets us to intermittent fasting. And I cover this stuff at the end just because for some folks it works, for some folks it does not. And I don't want anybody messing with this stuff until your diet is tightly dialed in, your training is fine, you're not overtraining, the stress levels in your life are fairly low, you're getting plenty of sleep, and all your vitamins, minerals, whatnot, everything is supplements, everything is in check. Like, I want all of that stuff to be in check before you start messing with intermittent fasting. So what is intermittent fasting? How did this stuff come about? A while back, some people, I guess, ran out of money in their lab, and they found out that if you take mice and you feed them 40% less calories than what they would eat ad libitum, they live longer. There's a caveat to that most people don't talk about, is that they were cold all the time, they were not reproductive because they were not getting enough calories, and what's the other one too? They were depressed, actually. So there's a lot of people doing this thinking, I'm going to live longer, and there's like forums of these people on the web, and they're mostly guys who are single, cold, depressed, skinny, and weak. They're like, all your muscle mass goes down the tubes when you do this. So the question arose, is there a better way to do this? Can we get all of the benefits of this stuff without any of the drawbacks? And that's when intermittent fasting came along. And what they found is if you took those critters and you fed them ad libitum one day, didn't feed them the next, you actually got all of the positive aspects of caloric restriction with adequate nutrition, which is abbreviated CRAN, without any of the detrimental effects. And this is some of the physiological adaptations that occur during the process. One thing that I'll point to, however, is that epinephrine and norepinephrine, which are fight or flight hormones, are increased in the process. So this is a certain amount of stress on the body. And for some people, if your sleep or stress isn't dialed in or you're exercising too much, this is going to destroy you. Like, this is really going to be the straw that breaks the camel's back. But for some people, like, this is the missing piece of the puzzle, and it works really well. Aside from like the 24 hours on, 24 hours off method, there's some people that have been doing a sort of a window deal. And that's what I do. I actually don't necessarily do it because I think that it's going to make me live longer or because all of this stuff is going to come to fruition. I do it because it's convenient. So I wake up at 9 in the morning, I'm in lab by 10, and I just, I'm going to eat at 12. So I skip breakfast. I skip one meal. I eat lunch at 12, I work out, my post-workout meal is also my dinner, and then after, let's say, 9 o'clock, I don't eat until 12 the next day. So that gives me about 15 hours without any food. The advantages to that is that your body becomes really fat adapted and very, I would say, resilient. I can go 24 hours without food. I'm not going to get cranky. I'm not going to shake. I'm not going to get lightheaded. In fact, I can work out if I want. So there's some really interesting advantages to that. Whenever I travel, I don't eat. I'm not going to touch airport food. There's no way. So I leave and I don't worry about it. It's just really liberating to not have to worry about this next meal that, if I don't have, I'm just going to have a mental breakdown or something like that. So there are aspects of it that are very beneficial. But like I said, I just don't mess with that stuff unless everything else is in place. But it is a really interesting thing. It also, there's no extra meals that you have to cook. Having to cook, if you're eating 6 to 8 meals a day, it's just a huge hassle. The way that I cook, I throw a bunch of meatloaves and whatnot with some vegetables in the oven on Sunday morning, and I let it slow cook at 200 to 250, really slowly over the entire day. And then I take the stuff and I throw it in the fridge, and that's food for the week. And that'll last me for all the meals that I need. So there's a lot less cooking involved, and like I said, it's less of a hassle, and it makes you somewhat more resilient. Not always super compatible with heavy training, and then there's some people that are kind of really tightly wound, fairly stressed, and not only do they do the intermittent fasting, but they do the fasted workouts. Cortisol levels are going to go really high in that case. And then, I was talking about the whole free testosterone to cortisol ratio earlier. That just might start to play into that. So be really careful with that stuff and how you implement it. And if you implement it and you find that it doesn't work for you, then just drop it. It's not magic. It works for some folks. It doesn't work for others. Right? So if it just doesn't work for you, drop it. But there's good ways to do it, bad ways to do it. I would personally like people to do it with really good food, but you can do it with crap food and still get some pretty good results out of it. So this is one study that was done in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition. Short-term modified alternate day fasting, a novel dietary strategy for weight loss and cardioprotection in obese adults. So they take obese adults. I would never do this. They take obese adults that obviously are metabolically deranged, and they put them on the 24-hour on, 24-hour off deal with crappy food. And even then, they see advantages. So that's telling you something. These are probably inactive folks, however. When you throw in the exercise, especially the high-intensity exercise, it changes things quite a bit. There's a lot of people that worry about protein synthesis and whatnot. Listen, there are essential amino acids, but your body can make amino acids. So you don't need to worry about, my muscle mass is all going to melt away if I do this stuff. And in fact, there's a growth hormone releasing effect that protects from muscle protein doing fasting. And this is known and documented. So we are almost done. I'm going to cover really quickly some blood work. Some people are getting blood work done and they want to see where the numbers should be. Fasting blood glucose. I'm going to cover mgs per deciliter, and I'm going to cover millimoles per liter. So in Canada, what you need to worry about is millimoles per liter. If you're in the States, it's mgs per deciliter. Mgs per deciliter is not quite as useful of a number, but hey, they still use miles over there. What can I say? Fasting blood glucose should be lower than 100 mg per deciliter. The range may also be measured in units of millimoles per liter, in which case the normal range is between 3.6 to 5.8. If you want to convert numbers from millimoles to liter to mg per deciliter, this is the conversion right here. Triglycerides should be under 100 mg per deciliter or 1.12 millimoles per liter. Greater than 1.69 millimoles per liter, 150 is like an indication of insulin resistance. Something's going on. This is not a good scene. HDL should be over 60 mg per deciliter or 1.54 millimoles per liter. LDL should be under 80 mg per deciliter or 2.05 millimoles per liter. Total cholesterol should be less than 200 mg per deciliter or 5.13 millimoles per liter. If you're on a ketogenic diet or really, really high fat, your cholesterol may go higher than that. In that case, it's not a big deal. If your doc is worried about it, just say, hey, give me a particle size. Let's get this settled and we'll see, is it pattern A, is it pattern B? If it's pattern B, then you might want to do something about it. Total cholesterol to HDL ratio should be less than 3. And this is a ratio, so the units don't matter in this case, right? Ideally, so here's triglycerides to HDL ratio. Ideally should be less than 2. 4 is kind of high, and 6 is a real danger zone. LDL particle size, you want to check for pattern A versus pattern B. C-reactive protein, which is an indicator of inflammation, especially with heart disease, that should be less than 10 mg per liter. HbA1c, glycated hemoglobin, anything over 5.5% is considered high. So I would like, ideally, the levels to be less than 5%. I think that's desirable. Homocysteine, that's implicated in heart disease again. You can read for yourself the levels here. I don't put a whole lot of faith in this number, but it's an extra thing that you can check if you want. Fasting blood insulin levels is pretty important. I'd say anything above 13 is probably bad news. The upper limit should be set, I'd say, at around 9, 9.3. Levels between 3 and 6 are probably ideal. Vitamin D, you want between 50 to 70 nanograms per milliliter or 150 to 175 nanomoles per liter. And then you can actually get the arachidonic acid, icosapentaenoic acid ratio measured. They typically do that with erythrocyte. If you're interested in like omega-3 indexes, I would go to the HeartScan blog and look at the omega-3 index that he has on there. It's pretty legit, that Dr. Davis has on there. It's pretty legit stuff. So those are all kinds of blood tests that you can use to monitor your progress or your current state if you're interested. And with that, you have survived this nutrition seminar. I'll take any questions that you guys have. The question. Yeah. The question. What do you think about food combining? This is, to me, like, what do you think about the zone? Listen, not everything that fell off the tree came in the ratio, right? And not everything that fell off the tree came in like this perfect combination of protein, carbohydrate, and whatnot. I just think it's hogwash. Really, I don't care. I really don't care. Yep.
If you're not able to get any pre-workout nutrition and you're low carb or ketogenic, BCAA supplement to prevent any sort of cortisol?
Yeah. So the lean gains dude talks about that a little bit. Like if you're doing some intermittent fasting and you're ketogenic, you can probably supplement with some branched chain amino acids and not necessarily going to break your fast.
Is that kind of just a buffer?
I think it's legit. I think it's totally good. Not doing an intermittent fasting deal, but you're interested in pre-workout supplementation. I would experiment with some carbohydrate, actually. Like really, let's say you're at a competition. This is not for health purposes. You're at a competition and you really want to kill this workout. Like you probably want to get some simple carbohydrate into the bloodstream just before you pick up the pace. And the reason I say that is because non-insulin mediated glucose uptake is going to turn on and it's going to suck that stuff in and allow you to push pretty hard. I know a lot of people that have some honey with warm water or something like that, like the really easily digestible source of sugar. I would say just get something that has high fructose corn syrup in it, because then it's pre-digested and it hits the bloodstream pretty quickly. Sure.
Would you say it's bad to consume coffee during an intermittent fast?
That's a tough one. I mean, so coffee actually does give you like a fight or flight response, and it's going to release some nutrients in the bloodstream. Whether or not that's detected as a meal, I'm not 100% sure. I do know some people that have coffee during intermittent fasting, but whether or not that constitutes breaking the fast, I really don't know. I'm not sure. But if you're, I would say it's probably not a big deal. Like liquid, something. There's very little calorie associated with that.
Any other supplementary books, blogs, anything you recommend?
Yeah. So as far as books are concerned, or this stuff, I actually, when Lauren Cordain wrote the Paleo Diet, it was 2000. He didn't know all the information that he knows now, and the editors forced him to make a lot of changes that kind of catered to the thinking of the time. So I'm hesitant to recommend that book. even though I think that there's good stuff there. He's going to write a new version of that with Rob and Wellborn. That's going to be the paleo diet for power athletes. I'm sure that's going to be really legit. Rob Wolf's book is going to be coming out in September. You can pre-order that on Amazon. And so far, there's Primal Body, Primal Mind that's not bad, and there's Mark Sisson's Primal Blueprint that isn't bad either, as far as books on some of this stuff. Lights Out, Sugar, Sleep, and Survival. It's kind of outdated, unfortunately, and there's a lot of stuff in it that they say that actually isn't true. So, yeah, I have a problem. I mean, I'm all for cutting fructose out of the diet, getting more sleep and whatnot. I just don't feel like I need that book to tell me that. There's stuff in there that I don't like, so I don't recommend it. Yo.
Okay, all these questions came in over the course of your time, so
okay.
Just bear with it. I did starting strength with a gallon of milk, but then changed to a keto diet, like the one you blogged about on Rob Wolf's Eyes. But my lifts suffered pretty badly and wouldn't budge. How should I modify the diet? How should I modify my training to reflect the diet you're recommending? How quickly should I expect weight gains to move up, etc.?
I mean, if the ketogenic diet doesn't work for you, I would just increase the carbohydrate content of the diet and see if that works. If the post-workout dairy was working, then run with it. Like I said, if you want to do that for 1 month and gain a lot of muscle mass, then take it out and lean out. Like, I'm fine with it. I just don't want it there for lifelong consumption. I think it's a bad idea. If you want to switch to, let's say, like a fermented dairy source, I think that would be ideal, like more of a yogurt or cheese type of scenario. There's people that are against that because of the renal acid load, but you already know what my opinion of the renal acid load is.
You mentioned using a liquidizer to make fruit smoothies can cause a higher insulin spike when it changes the surface area of the food. Isn't that what our mouth and teeth do anyway to a degree, especially if we are chewing a food correctly? Can you clarify?
But not to the degree that a blender does it. Right.
Do you recommend eating carbs post-workout just mostly when doing Metcon and glycogen-depleting exercise, or even for strength workouts as well?
It's mostly for Metcon. If you're doing strength, just like a protein and fat will do, but most of the carbs mostly for Metcon. Yeah.
James Fitzgerald, Rob Wolf, and Charles Poliquin have all recommended HCI supplementation to enhance digestion.
Yeah. So, I'm in a discussion with James on that. I think that this stuff is legit. My problem is with how they say or how they think this works. So Poliquin thinks that betaine hydrochloride is the source of HCl. Listen, HCl is a really strong acid, and when it protonates something to make a salt, it doesn't go the other way. So there's no source of HCl. Now, there's a possibility that betaine hydrochloride is increasing HCl production by the stomach, but I haven't found any evidence to support that. I didn't find one website that said that was the case, but they have no scientific evidence to support their claim. What I think is going on is that you have other enzymes in the mix, especially when you're talking about now food enzymes, mainly papain and bromelain, which are both used to digest protein, and then you have ox bile, which is helping you digest fat. And I think those are the primary helpers in the deal. Betaine hydrochloride, however, is known as a lipotropic agent, and that lipotropic agent has been tested for helping people get rid of, let's say, fatty liver disease, so it's like mobilizing fat out of the liver. So I think they're totally legit. It's just that the way that they think they're working is probably not exactly, specifically with respect to betaine hydrochloride, is probably not exactly how they think it is working. But yeah, I mean, if that works for you, you're in a scenario where you have to eat like a heck of a lot of food to do your mass gain, then go for it.
I heard on that that there was some downstream signaling from intake.
There was a what?
I think Rob was saying that there was some downstream signaling when you take a now from super enzyme.
Yeah. So the reason why like the stomach acid is important is when it hits the duodenum. We talked about this a little bit. It causes a secretion of bicarbonate by the pancreas, and then a release of digestive enzymes. But again, that's assuming that it's increasing the HCl output, and I'm not convinced that that's what it's doing.
Is there a therapeutic? Because that was what I got. There might be a therapeutic.
So the reason why you would want to go that route is that there's some people with this low-fat, low-protein, high-carbohydrate diet that have completely screwed up their digestion. They have low biliary output, they have a low capacity for digesting protein, and they need it. Yeah, so certainly when we're talking about steroids, you become dependent on them. With this supplement, it seems like people can dial back the dose and eventually, get off of it. I don't have any experience with it myself personally, but that's what I've seen, or that's what I've heard.
Okay, still talking. You talked about vitamin D, liquid form. Is that good?
What was that?
When you talked about vitamin D, is liquid form all right?
I think so. I think that's formulated in like an oil or something like that.
Okay, you've already covered off one of his questions about your views on using BCAA. Another question is, what's your take on genetically modified foods? Read things about them affecting the bacteria in the stomach and the bacteria implementing proteins from the GM food.
Yeah, there's a lot to contend with here. And I would have to do more research. Listen, if you have sex and have children, that's genetic, manipulation. The problem is that we're introducing genes into foods that come from other animals, and then we don't know what the consequences will be if those get passed on to other species via cross-pollination and whatever. So there's some biologists that have said that, we are running one of the biggest biological experiments ever done with this genetically modified food, and that's possible. I know that there's some people that have been really, really sensitive to genetically modifying corn, but regular corn is fine. There's some people that are really sensitive to genetically modifying wheat, but the original versions of wheat, being emmer and einkorn, are okay. So, there are some issues there. Time will tell whether or not it's a mistake or not. But, issues have been brought up with allergies and reactions to these genetically modified foods. I'm personally of the opinion that, it's probably not a good idea to mess with that when it comes to introducing genes from different species. But if you're doing it in a natural way, just like increasing the variability of the genes, there's I think people use radiation, for example, and then get a bunch of different variations of this one species and see what it does. There's probably not a whole lot of problem there. It's just they're just increasing the variability, the gene variability process and the selection process. But yeah, that's a complicated issue. That's it. Well, we're done. Are there any other questions?
The grass-fed meat?
Yeah, as much as possible. Meat from grass-fed animals, pastured animals, and dairy from grass-fed animals and pastured animals, as much as possible.
I have a question. It's clear that a grass-fed cow is far superior. Not even close. As far as chicken's concerned, or other meats, if you at a restaurant and you had to pick a meat option, low-fat kind of.
Yeah. So chances are that the chickens are going to be fed a bit more grain. They're birds, so they are slightly more tolerant to grains, and birds themselves are tolerant to grains. But that probably means it's going to have more omega-6 in it as opposed to it being pastured. But that's not the biggest concern. As long as someone is following the guidelines, even I show the research, right? If you're eating the whole meat as opposed to the processed meat, you're not increasing the incidences of these diseases and whatnot. And when you're looking at the linoleic acid content, it's milligrams per 100 grams as opposed to grams per 100 grams for the seed oil. So it's much lower. So I'm like, if all you have access to is cuts of meat that are grain-fed, yeah, you can go for the leaner ones and then try to supplement with monounsaturated fats or whatnot on the side. That's what Lauren Cordain does in the original Paleo diet. That's fine. Yeah, I'm not too worried. I don't think it's like a deal breaker.
No, it's just kind of in a setting where you can have regular
So the question being, if you're at a restaurant, you have to pick between a cut of meat, it's not grass fed. What do you pick? Like, do you pick a lean meat or a fatty cut of meat? Yeah, do you pick? Yeah, do you pick like chicken breast, no skin? Yeah, sure. If you want to be like really, really good about it.
How much protein is like too much protein? Like,
So when it comes to percentage, how much protein is too much protein? When it comes to the percentages as far as calories is concerned, in the 35 to 40% range, people start to see that that's the limit. Like, you go beyond 35 to 40%, you might get diarrhea. So don't make it. 25% is enough. 30% is enough. You don't need to go to those kinds of levels.
is there any other effect of diarrhea? Like, is there like some sort of like toxicity in the
Oh yeah, I mean, eventually, if you keep increasing the protein, there will be some because there's urea production and all kinds of other things. So yeah, there is some toxicity that's involved there, but it's pretty hard to do because most of the protein that we ingest has enough fat that comes with it to balance things out. So it is pretty hard to reach the protein toxicity level. You have to eat a lot of lean protein to do that, and almost be like on the zero carb deal that we saw with Anderson.
So it's not necessarily, it's more of a ratio than like per gram, like say like
It's almost like a closer to a ratio, but yeah, you can if you exceed even if the ratio is right, you can exceed the per gram limit. All right, that's it, folks. Let's barbecue. Thank you.